I caught my husband with my son's fiancée. I was in total shock when I found out that she was his long-lost daughter. Was I wrong for what I did? You tell me. One day, I walked into my own home, a place I had built with love and trust for over 30 years, only to find my husband, the man I swore an oath to, in an unspeakable act with a woman who is supposed to become my daughter-in-law. My son's fiancée. The image is burned into my mind, a grotesque tableau that shattered every illusion I held. But that wasn't even the most shocking part, not by a long shot. As I stood there, frozen, unable to process the betrayal unfolding before my eyes, a single, devastating truth slowly dawned on me, a truth that ripped the very fabric of our lives apart, revealing a secret so profound, so utterly unbelievable, that it made the initial infidelity almost a footnote. She was his daughter. His long-lost daughter. Tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? How do you even begin to untangle a mess that deep, that convoluted, that painfully personal? How do you reconcile a husband's monstrous betrayal with a father's tragic reunion? Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when our lives felt simple, predictable, and full of the kind of quiet happiness that you take for granted until it's brutally ripped away. My husband, John, and I had been married for 32 years. We had built a comfortable life, raised two wonderful children, Mark and Sarah, and navigated the usual ups and downs of a long-term relationship. John was, or so I thought, a good man, a dedicated father, a loving husband, and a successful architect who had worked hard to provide for our family. Our son, Mark, was our eldest, a brilliant, kind-hearted young man who had followed in his father's footsteps, albeit in a different field, becoming a respected civil engineer. He was everything a mother could wish for. About 2 years ago, Mark introduced us to Emily. She was bright, vivacious, and genuinely charming. From the moment I met her, I adored her. She had this infectious laugh and a way of making everyone around her feel at ease. Mark was head over heels, and it was easy to see why. Emily was beautiful, with striking green eyes and a cascade of fiery red hair that seemed to capture the light wherever she went. She was an orphan, she told us, having lost her parents in a car accident when she was just a child. She had been raised by her aunt and uncle, who, while loving, were emotionally distant, leaving her with a longing for a close-knit family, a longing that Mark and I were more than happy to fill. We welcomed her into our family with open arms, treating her as the daughter I never had. Sarah, my actual daughter, lived abroad, pursuing her career, so Emily quickly filled that void in my heart. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romance. Mark proposed to Emily 6 months after they started dating, and it was a joyous occasion. I remember weeping happy tears, so thrilled that my son had found such a wonderful partner. We immediately began planning the wedding, a grand affair that was to take place in 6 months at a beautiful vineyard estate. Emily was so excited, constantly sending me Pinterest boards and asking for my opinions on everything from the floral arrangements to the wedding dress. I loved every minute of it. It felt like a fresh, new chapter for our family, a celebration of love and new beginnings. As the wedding day drew closer, I started noticing subtle shifts, small things that, in retrospect, were glaring red flags I chose to ignore. John, who had always been somewhat reserved, seemed to be spending an unusual amount of time with Emily. At first, I dismissed it. He was a doting future father-in-law, eager to make her feel welcome. He'd offer to drive her to appointments, help her with wedding errands, and even started taking an interest in her hobbies, which included photography. Emily was a talented amateur photographer, and John, in his younger days, had dabbled in it too. I thought it was sweet, a bonding experience. They would spend hours in his study, looking at old photographs, discussing camera techniques. I'd walk in and see them huddled together, laughing, and my heart would swell with pride. My husband, so good with my future daughter-in-law. But then the visits became more frequent, and less about wedding planning. Emily would drop by the house when Mark was at work, ostensibly to talk to me about something, but often ending up in John's study for prolonged periods. I'd sometimes hear hushed conversations, and once, When I walked past the study door, I heard Emily laugh in a way that felt intimate. It was a nervous, almost breathless laugh that I had never heard her use with Mark. My gut tightened, but I pushed the feeling down. Don't be ridiculous, I told myself. Asterisk, she's practically your daughter. John is your husband of 30 years. Asterisk. Then came the gifts. John started buying Emily expensive presents, far beyond what a future father-in-law would normally give. A professional camera lens, a designer handbag, delicate jewelry. When I questioned him, he'd brush it off, saying, "She's practically family, darling. She deserves nice things. Besides, it's for the wedding, for her new life." And Emily, to her credit, always seemed slightly uncomfortable receiving them, insisting they were too much. But John was persistent, almost insistent. I remember one evening, a few weeks before the wedding, Emily was over for dinner. Mark had gone to pick up some wine, and it was just the three of us. John was showing Emily some old family albums, pictures of our childhood, of Mark and Sarah growing up. He paused on a picture of himself from his early 20s, long before we met. He looked different, younger, of course, but there was a certain intensity in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Emily stared at the picture with an unnerving fascination. "You look so familiar," she murmured, almost to herself. John quickly closed the album, a strange, almost panicked expression on his face. He quickly changed the subject, too quickly. I noticed the interaction, but again, I dismissed it. My mind, in its protective ignorance, refused to connect the dots that were slowly forming a horrifying picture. The day of the discovery. It was a Tuesday. I had decided to come home early from my volunteer work at the local library. I had a headache, and all I wanted was a quiet afternoon to myself. Mark was at a conference in another city, and wouldn't be back for a couple of days. Emily had told me she was going to a bridal fitting, and John was supposedly at a client meeting. The house should have been empty. I remember the silence as I unlocked the front door. It wasn't the usual comfortable silence of an empty house. It was heavy, expectant. I kicked off my shoes and walked towards the kitchen to make some tea. As I passed John's study, the door was slightly ajar. I heard a muffled sound, a soft moan. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he had forgotten something, came back, and was on a call. Maybe Emily had also forgotten something and was there talking to him. But the sound, it wasn't a phone call. It was unmistakably intimate. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. I pushed the door open, slowly, hesitantly. And there they were, on the plush rug in front of the fireplace, in a tangle of limbs and whispered words, were my husband, John, and my son's fiancée, Emily. The scene was sickeningly clear. Emily's fiery red hair fanned out on the carpet, her face flushed, her eyes half closed in a look of pleasure. John was above her, his face contorted in a similar expression. My breath caught in my throat. The world tilted on its axis. My vision swam, and for a moment, I thought I would faint. I must have made some sound, a gasp, a choked cry, because they both froze. John's eyes snapped open, wide with shock and horror as he saw me. Emily's eyes, those beautiful green eyes I had come to adore, flickered open too, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over her face. They scrambled apart, a pathetic, clumsy mess of guilty limbs. John looked like a deer caught in headlights, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Emily, however, did something completely unexpected. Instead of looking away in shame or bursting into tears, she just stared at me, a strange, intense mixture of fear and defiance in her gaze. What is going on? My voice was a shaky whisper, barely audible, laced with a venom I didn't know I possessed. John finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate plea. "Eleanor, it's not what you think." A ludicrous lie, even to his own ears, I imagine. "Not what I think." I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that was entirely alien to me. "I think I just caught my husband with my son's fiancée, in my own home, just weeks before their wedding. What else could I possibly think, John?" Emily, who had quickly pulled herself together, was now sitting upright, her red hair wild around her face. She still hadn't spoken, but her eyes were fixed on John, a silent question passing between them. Then, she slowly, deliberately reached for a small, silver locket that hung around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. She pulled it out, clutched it, and then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but resonated with an authority I had never heard from her, she said, "Tell her, John. Tell her everything." John flinched, as if struck. He looked from Emily to me, his eyes filled with a torment I had never seen before. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Eleanor. Emily, she's not who you think she is." My mind reeled. "What are you talking about?" "She's Mark's fiancée. She's going to be my daughter-in-law." He shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "No. She's my daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My brain simply refused to process them. They made no sense. My only daughter was Sarah, living happily in London. "What kind of sick joke is this, John?" I demanded, my voice rising to a frantic pitch. "Are you trying to make this worse?" Emily then spoke, her voice still quiet, but firm. "It's true. My name isn't just Emily. It's Emily Davies. And John is my father." She held out the locket. It wasn't just a locket. It was a half-heart pendant, intricately engraved with the initial J. "My mother gave me this. She said my father had the other half. His name was John, and she said he was an architect." The world truly stopped spinning then. A cold dread seeped into my bones, worse than any betrayal. John had had an affair, years ago, before we met, he claimed. A brief, meaningless fling in his early 20s, when he was working on a project in a different city. He had told me about it, confessed it to me when we were engaged, saying he wanted no secrets between us. He had assured me it was over, that he had never seen the woman again. He never mentioned a child. Never. My gaze flickered between them, between the two people who had just shattered my life in the most unimaginable way. The resemblance, which I had previously dismissed as a trick of the light or a sentimental projection, suddenly became blindingly clear. Emily's green eyes were the exact shade of John's. The strong line of her jaw, the slight curl in her red hair, which was remarkably similar to the auburn tones John's hair used to have before it silvered. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed it? "John," I whispered, my voice devoid of emotion. "Is this true?" He nodded, tears now streaming down his face. "Yes." "Her mother, Clara. We had a brief relationship. She never told me she was pregnant. I moved back home. We lost touch. Years later, I tried to find her, but she had moved, changed her number. I thought she had just moved on." He paused, choked by sobs. "I only found out about Emily a few months ago. Her aunt, Clara's sister, contacted me. Clara had passed away, and she had found some old letters, a picture of me, and a will that stated I was Emily's father. Emily was grown, but she wanted to meet me. She wanted to know her birth father." "And you decided to fulfill her wish by sleeping with her?" The question was a low growl, ripped from the depths of my shattered soul. Emily interjected, her voice laced with pain. "No, that's not how it happened. When I found out John was my father, I was overjoyed. I had always longed for a family. We met, and it was overwhelming. I felt an instant connection. But then I met Mark, and I fell in love with him, truly. I didn't know John was his father at first. When I connected the dots and saw that John, my birth father, was Mark's father, my fiancé's father, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell Mark. How could I? It would have destroyed everything. So you decided to have an affair with your father, who is also your fiancé's father, instead of telling anyone?" My voice was rising, hysteria bubbling just beneath the surface. John put his head in his hands. "It wasn't an affair, not in the way you think, Eleanor. It was complicated. When Emily and I first reconnected, There was this intense bond, this shared history we never knew we had. And yes, a part of me, a selfish, foolish part, saw her as a chance to rewrite the past, to be the father I never was. But then she introduced Mark, and my world imploded. I knew I couldn't tell anyone. It would tear our family apart. So I tried to keep them apart, subtle at first, discouraging their relationship. But Mark was so in love. And Emily was so happy with him. I saw how much she wanted a family. I didn't want to take that away from her. But you still kept sleeping with her. I screamed, the full weight of the revelation finally crashing down on me. You still betrayed me. You betrayed Mark. You betrayed our entire family. Emily looked at me, her green eyes filled with a desperate plea. I know it sounds horrific. Believe me, I hated myself for it. But John, he was my father. And he was also the father of the man I loved. It was an impossible situation. I was so confused, so lost. He promised me he would find a way to tell Mark, to tell you, eventually after the wedding. He said he was going to take some time, find the right moment to explain everything once we were truly settled into the family. After the wedding? I scoffed. So you planned to marry my son, knowing he was your half-brother and that you were sleeping with his father? And John, you planned to let your son marry your own daughter? John finally looked up, his face etched with pure agony. I know it sounds insane. And it was. I was a coward, Eleanor. I was so afraid of losing both of them, of destroying our family. I thought if I just waited, if I just kept everything quiet, I could find a way to make it right. Emily and we just needed time to process everything, to figure out how to be a father and daughter while she was also marrying my son. It was a terrible, desperate mistake. Our interactions, they weren't right. They were born of confusion, of a desire for connection, but they crossed lines we never should have crossed. It was a moment of weakness, of utter, reprehensible weakness, Eleanor, fueled by the sheer shock of discovering each other and the impossible circumstances we found ourselves in. He was shaking, his voice cracking with emotion. I wanted to protect everyone, and instead, I've destroyed everything. I just stared at them, the scene playing out like a twisted, grotesque drama. My husband, the man I loved, was a liar, a cheat, and a man who had not only betrayed our marriage, but had been involved in an incestuous relationship, however confused or complicated, with his own daughter, who was also my son's fiancée. And Emily, the sweet, vulnerable girl I had welcomed into my home, was a participant in this horrifying deception, a woman who was about to marry her half-brother while secretly entangled with her birth father. The sheer magnitude of the deceit, the layers of secrets, the absolute violation of trust, was suffocating. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline, the subtle glances, the hushed conversations, the expensive gifts. It all made a sickening kind of sense now. The familiarity Emily felt when looking at John's old photo. The secretive meetings. Their intense bond. It wasn't just father-daughter affection. It was something deeply confused and morally reprehensible. They were both victims and perpetrators, caught in a web of their own making, fueled by fear and a desperate attempt to reconcile an impossible situation. And I, the trusting wife and mother, was the last to know, left to pick up the pieces of a family that had been shattered beyond recognition. The wedding, the beautiful, joyous celebration we had been planning, was now a macabre joke, a testament to the colossal lie they had been living. And my son, my kind, trusting son, was completely oblivious, about to step into a nightmare. The thought of Mark, so innocent, so in love, about to have his world utterly destroyed, filled me with a primal rage, a protective fury that dwarfed my own pain. So that's the situation I was in. I stood there, reeling, the air thick with their confessions, their desperate pleas, and my own rapidly crumbling reality. The betrayal was one thing, but the sheer, unfathomable complexity of the family ties, the incestuous undertones, the looming horror for my son, it was all too much. And I had to make a choice. A choice that would determine the fate of my marriage, my family, and the happiness of my son. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted them immediately, exposed everything? Would you have tried to protect your son from the truth, no matter the cost? Or would you have sought a different path, one that tried to salvage some semblance of peace from the ruins? Tell me, what would have been your first move in this impossible scenario? My first instinct was to scream, to unleash every ounce of fury, every broken shard of my heart, at both of them. To call Mark immediately, to expose their heinous secret, to burn everything to the ground. But a deeper, colder part of me took over. The protective mother, the strategic thinker, the woman who had always tried to maintain order in our family. If I reacted purely out of emotion, I knew it would be catastrophic. The fallout would be immense, uncontrollable. I needed to think, to plan. I needed to protect my son. I looked at John, then at Emily. Their faces were a mirror of guilt and terror. "Get dressed," I said, my voice eerily calm, though my insides felt like a raging storm. "Both of you. We're going to talk and you're going to tell me everything, every single detail from the very beginning. And then we're going to figure out what happens next." They scurried to comply, like children caught in a forbidden act. While they dressed, I walked into the living room, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. My mind was a whirlwind. How could I have been so blind? All the signs, the subtle shifts, the stolen glances, the expensive gifts, they all clicked into place, forming a horrifying mosaic of deceit. The thought of Mark, my unsuspecting, loving son, marrying his half-sister, who was also sleeping with his father, twisted my stomach. It was beyond comprehension, beyond any moral boundary. When they returned, fully clothed, they sat on opposite ends of the sofa, looking like two condemned prisoners. I sat in my armchair, facing them, my expression, I hoped, unreadable. "Start from the beginning, John," I commanded, my voice still dangerously calm. "From the moment you found out about Emily. And don't leave anything out. I want to know every conversation, every meeting, every transgression." And so, the truth unfolded in excruciating detail. John recounted how Emily's aunt had contacted him, completely out of the blue, with the bombshell news that he had a daughter. He had been shocked, overwhelmed, and a part of him, he admitted, felt a profound sense of loss for the years he had missed. He had secretly met Emily, and the connection was instantaneous, powerful. Emily, for her part, had been searching for her biological father her entire life. She was overjoyed to find him, and in her vulnerability and excitement, she had formed an intense bond with John. Then she met Mark, and the impossible choice presented itself. She loved Mark, genuinely, but she had just found her father, and the idea of alienating him, of losing this newfound family, terrified her. They both admitted that their relationship had started innocently enough, a father-daughter bond, but the lines quickly blurred in the confusion and secrecy. The emotional intensity, the shared secret, the desperate longing for connection on Emily's part, and the guilt and desire to make up for lost time on John's part had led them down a path that was morally bankrupt. They confessed to several instances of physical intimacy, moments of weakness and confusion, as John put it, fueled by alcohol and the sheer impossibility of their situation. Each confession was a fresh stab to my heart. "So, you are planning to let Mark marry his half-sister?" I asked, the question sharp, cutting through the thick air of their confessions. John flinched.
"No, I
was trying to find a way out, Eleanor.
I swear."
I was going to tell Emily that she couldn't marry Mark. We just hadn't figured out how to do it without revealing everything, without destroying both of them. I was going to suggest they postpone the wedding, and then, slowly, we would find a way to explain the truth. Emily nodded, tears silently streaming down her face. I was so lost.
So ashamed.
I knew it was wrong. Every day, I felt like a monster. But I loved Mark. And I loved John, not in that way, but as my father. I didn't want to lose either of them. It felt like an impossible situation. Impossible situations demand impossible solutions, I stated, my voice firm. And this is one of them. Here's what's going to happen. The wedding is off. Immediately. John and Emily gasped. But Mark. John started. Mark will be told a version of the truth. I interrupted, my gaze fixed on John. A version that protects him as much as possible, while still explaining why his wedding is cancelled. You, John, are going to take full responsibility for everything. You will tell him that you had an affair, that you betrayed me, and that because of your actions, the wedding cannot proceed. You will not mention Emily's parentage to him. Not yet. Not until we've had time to process this. And Emily, you will go along with this story. You will tell Mark that you cannot marry him, that you need to find yourself, that you cannot go through with the wedding. You will break his heart, but you will do it in a way that protects him from the full, sickening truth of your connection to his father. But why? Emily whispered, her face pale. Why protect John? Why not tell Mark everything? Because, I explained, my voice laced with steel. Mark's happiness, his sanity, is my top priority. The knowledge that his fiancée is his half-sister and that she was sleeping with his father would utterly destroy him. He might never recover. This way, he will be hurt, devastated even, but he will not be forced to grapple with the incestuous implications, the utter perversion of his family. John will take the fall for the affair, and you, Emily, will be the heartbreaker. It's the least messy path, the one that causes the least amount of irreparable psychological damage to my son. John looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of relief and renewed despair. And what about us, Eleanor? What about our marriage? Our marriage, I said, my voice cracking slightly, is over. There's no coming back from this, John. You have not only betrayed my trust in the most profound way, but you have also dragged our son into this mess, almost allowing him to marry his own half-sister. I cannot look at you the same way. I cannot live with this deception, this horror. You will move out. Immediately. I will contact a lawyer tomorrow. This family, as we knew it, is shattered. But I will do everything in my power to ensure Mark and Sarah emerge from this with as much emotional stability as possible. Emily started to sob, truly sob, her face buried in her hands. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was so confused, so desperate for a family. I looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity. She was, in many ways, a victim of circumstance, a young woman desperate for a connection as she had been denied. But her actions were unforgivable. I understand your pain, Emily, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. But you made terrible choices. You enabled this deception. You chose to marry my son while entangled with his father. You have to live with the consequences of those choices. And part of those consequences is that you can no longer be a part of this family, not in the way you envisioned. You are John's daughter. That cannot be changed. But you cannot be Mark's wife. And you cannot be my daughter-in-law. You need to leave after you talk to Mark. And you need to figure out your relationship with John, strictly as father and daughter, outside of our lives. The next few days were a blur of pain and controlled chaos. When Mark returned from his conference, I sat him down. Before I could even begin, John, pale and trembling, came in and confessed to having an affair. He didn't name Emily, simply said he had made a terrible mistake, that he had fallen for another woman, and that he had irrevocably broken our marriage. Mark was devastated, utterly heartbroken. He loved his father, looked up to him. To hear this confession, to see his parents' marriage crumble before his eyes, was agonizing for him. He lashed out, not at me, but at John, accusing him of destroying everything. It was a painful, necessary performance. Then came Emily's turn. She met with Mark, her eyes swollen from crying, and told him she couldn't marry him. She gave him a vague, tearful explanation about needing to find herself, about realizing she wasn't ready for marriage, about having too many unresolved issues from her past. Mark was crushed. He pleaded with her, begged her to reconsider, but Emily, to her credit, stood firm, repeating her carefully rehearsed lines, every word a dagger to Mark's heart and mine. He was completely blindsided, unable to comprehend the sudden shift in her. He blamed himself, blamed his father, blamed the universe. It was gut-wrenching to watch, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was the only way to shield him from the far greater horror. John moved out that same day, taking only a few essential belongings. Our house, once a sanctuary of love and laughter, now felt hollow, echoing with the ghosts of shattered dreams. Emily also left, disappearing from our lives as abruptly as she had entered them. I later learned that she went to live with her aunt, trying to piece together her own fractured identity and reconcile her relationship with her newly found father. The aftermath was brutal. Mark fell into a deep depression. He barely ate, barely slept, and retreated into himself. I spent countless hours talking to him, holding him, reassuring him that none of this was his fault. It was a long, arduous process, filled with tears and anger and confusion. My daughter, Sarah, flew home immediately, providing much-needed support and a sounding board for my own grief and fury. She was shocked, disgusted by her father's actions, and incredibly protective of Mark and me. She knew the general story. Dad had an affair. The wedding was off. The deeper, darker truth remained a carefully guarded secret between me, John, and Emily, a secret that felt like a poisonous weight in my soul. I initiated divorce proceedings, which were surprisingly swift and uncontested. John signed everything, his spirit broken, his once confident demeanor replaced by a perpetual shadow of guilt and remorse. He moved to another city, seeking a fresh start, trying to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with Emily, strictly as father and daughter, a relationship I wanted no part of. I kept my maiden name, a symbolic act of reclaiming my identity, of severing myself from the man who had shattered my world. It's been a year since that day. Mark is slowly, painfully healing. He still carries the scars of his broken engagement and his father's betrayal, but he's starting to re-engage with life, to see a future beyond the darkness. He occasionally asks about Emily, but I tell him she's doing well, living her own life, and that sometimes things just don't work out. I still haven't told him the full truth, and I don't know if I ever will. The thought of inflicting that level of pain and trauma on him, of revealing the incestuous horror that almost consumed his life, is more than I can bear. I chose to protect him, and I believe, to this day, it was the right choice. My relationship with John is non-existent. We communicate only through lawyers regarding property settlements. I hear snippets from mutual acquaintances that he is trying to atone, trying to build a genuine, non-romantic, non-sexual relationship with Emily, to be the father she always deserved. A part of me, a very small, deeply buried part, hopes he succeeds. But for me, the man I married, the man I loved, died that day in his study, replaced by a stranger capable of unimaginable deceit. I am rebuilding my life, piece by painful piece. I've reconnected with old friends, found new hobbies, and am pouring my energy into my children, particularly Mark, helping him navigate his own healing journey. The pain is still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer consumes me. I learned a terrible lesson about trust, about secrets, and about the hidden complexities of even the most seemingly stable relationships. And I learned the immense strength of a mother's love, a love that would go to any length to protect her child from a truth too horrific to bear. This whole experience has been a waking nightmare, a testament to how quickly life can unravel when secrets and lies take root. My story is a cautionary tale, a raw account of betrayal, impossible choices, and the enduring power of a mother's will. I often wonder, did I make the right decision by keeping the full truth from Mark? Was my protection of him justified, or am I simply delaying an inevitable, even more painful revelation down the line? It's a question I grapple with every single day. So, what do you think? Were my actions justified? Like this video if you believe I did what I had to do to protect my son. Subscribe for more stories like this, where I share the unbelievable, the heartbreaking, and the downright shocking narratives from real life. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I truly want to hear your perspectives, your judgments, and your advice. I'll see you all in the next story.